I want to welcome you on the meeting, the man behind the Artur Szyk Renaissance. My name is Joanna Podolska and I am director of the Marek Edelman Dialogue Center in Łódź, in the city of Artur Szyk. Artur Szyk was a Polish and Jewish artist who worked primarily as a book illustrator and a political artist. He was born in 1894 in Łódź, in the middle of today Poland. But in that moment, Artur Szyk was a citizen of Russian Empire. Anyway, he always proudly regarded himself both as a Pole and as a Jew. 100 years ago, he took part in the Polish Bolshevik War, and he served as a Polish cavalry officer and as an artistic director of the propaganda department of the Polish army in Łódź, or Lodz. It is why we speak about Artur Szyk this year. But as a matter of fact, the Marek Edelman Dialogue Center prepared his exhibition Artur Szyk, the Man of Dialogue, a few years ago. And since that, we travel with this exhibition around Poland, but also to Vilna in Lithuania and Lwów in Ukraine. We found Artur Szyk work and his biography as a bridge between people of different backgrounds and a great man of dialogue. I would like to welcome Rabbi Irvin Ungar, antiquarian bookseller, curator of the Arthur Szyk Society, author of many publications and exhibitions, considered the best expert of Arthur Szyk art in the world, credited as the man behind the Szyk Renaissance in the world. I am very happy you accept our invitation to talk about Artur Szyk again, and I am very sorry we are not able to meet now in Łódź, in the city of Artur Szyk. As I know, you discovered Artur Szyk art in 1975. So since 75 to today, it's almost 50 years, 45 years, okay. So I would like to ask you if you can share this story, your story with Artur Szyk, with our audience.
Thank you, Joanna, for inviting me to participate with you in this interview and to share my love and my passion for Arthur Szyk with your audience, both in Poland and wherever else in the world people are listening to this. I also am grateful to rekindle our relationship, which began back in, I think, in 2005 during my first visit to Łódź. And I remember then you were also involved as a journalist and were also guiding people through Łódź. And I had brought a tour group with me, and it was so great to meet you then and to continue our relationship and our common interest in Arthur Szyk, making him an international figure and reaffirming both his presence in Poland and in the United States, and his identity as both a Pole and as a Jew. So I couldn't ask for a better partner abroad. So thank you again for continuing what you do. My personal interest in Arthur Szyk really didn't begin until the late 1980s, although I first remember meeting Arthur Szyk in 1975. Now, Szyk died in 1951 in the United States in New Canaan, Connecticut. I was only 3 years old when he died, but I consider myself having met him when I first encountered one of his books. And that was the Haggadah, a reproduction of the book which Jews use at the holiday of Passover to read from, about the Exodus from ancient Egypt and the liberation from bondage. And I bought a copy of that book in 1975, and then gave it to people in my wedding party as a gift. For about 13 years, I didn't think about Arthur Szyk, and then I made a transition. At that time, I was a rabbi in a congregation in New York, and then later a rabbi in California. 13 years as a acting as a pulpit rabbi, and then I decided to make a transition in my life and entered the world of rare books, antiquarian books, as a bookseller and someone who would make a living through the collection of important and historical books and documents. I rediscovered Arthur Szyk by going into an antique shop in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I kicked a box of prints. There were a box underneath a table. I opened up the box. I saw that it was the same brilliant colors as in his Haggadah from 13 years ago. And the pictures jumped out at me and I said, this is fabulous. I have to buy it. I bought it. I soon discovered that shortly thereafter, again, this was in the late 1980s, that Arthur Szyk also illustrated political books. I saw an anti-Nazi book called The New Order. It has a bright yellow dust jacket. It had been published in 1941 before America entered the war, and it was a satire on the Germans and attacking them for their anti-Polish behavior and their anti-Jewish actions and anti-Polish actions. And I bought this book, and I couldn't. And the idea that a Jewish artist who was doing religious artwork was also interested in politics fascinated me, and I loved the idea that he was combining those two worlds, and that really was what started my interest in Arthur Szyk. This was, again, in the late 1980s. It goes on from there. I mean, it explodes after that in the sense that I began to exhibit at book fairs, where I would exhibit Arthur Szyk art. People would come up to The New Order and other things which I had not pay attention to any of my other books, but they would Arthur Szyk. And the more I began to learn about this artist, I began to feel like this was an artist I was going to spend the rest of my life devoted to. How could I not? I mean, a man of brilliant colors, a man whose art had unbelievable messages dealing with humanity and against tyranny and racism and prejudice and bigotry, art that advocated for justice and freedom, for Jews, for Poles, for all of humanity, a man who cared deeply about his own people. And he saw the Poles as his own people. He saw the Jews as his own people, and used the best of his own tradition as a Jew in terms of Jewish teaching to care about both peoples and then to become an advocate for humanity at large. I mean, this is what fascinates me about Szyk. You know, the idea that people have self-identity. You know, people are nationalists. They care about their own people, their own country that they're in. But see, the genius about Arthur Szyk was not only was he a nationalist for one country, which was Poland, and a nationalist for the Jewish people, and a nationalist for the United States of America, but he was also a universalist. I mean, somebody who combined the idea that he cared about his own people, but yet he cared about all people. I mean, and he did this through art. In other words, Szyk used to say, art is not my aim, it's my means. It was the way in which he communicated with people. And he did it not in any passive way by just creating nice art, but he did it in an active way. He saw himself as an activist artist. He saw himself as a fighting artist. That's how he saw himself. He saw himself as a soldier in art. I mean, this is how Szyk envisioned himself. And in a number of works of art, you'll see him dressed in quasi-military garb, and also with the medals that he was given by numerous countries, by Poland, by France, and by the United States, which would be on his uniform. And then he'd have a palette in his hand where he would be painting. I mean, by the way, a palette, he saw himself he saw himself as a illuminator, as a painter. In fact, in the end of the Passover Haggadah, he also identified himself as Image to Israel, the painter of Israel. Not as he did caricature, he did cartoon, he did illustration, all of them. He illustrated almost 30 books, but he saw himself as an artist, as a great artist who used his art on behalf of humanity. That's how Szyk saw himself. And
some people call him as a one-man army.
Exactly.
Fighting for a better future, for a better world. But
Exactly.
he was a kind of, yes, he was important, and he was involved in many historical situations during 100 years ago in Polish Bolsheviks war, Second World War. He was involved in many important situations. But how could you explain that Artur Szyk is he important for 21st century people, for young generation? Why you can tell that you should learn something from Artur Szyk?
Okay. Well, we're jumping right to the present, and I'll go back and I'll link the narrative to bring us to the present. But let me answer your question directly without all the other side thoughts that I have. First, you mentioned that he was seen as a one-man army, and that is what the American press wrote about him in numerous publications. Szyk saw himself as a fighting artist, and in fact, in one painting which he did of Franklin Roosevelt, President Roosevelt, he dedicated it to Eleanor Roosevelt, in which he signed his name, Arthur Szyk, Soldier in Art. That is how he saw himself. And in fact, when he, after he left Europe, I should say, just for a timeline, in 1937, he moved from Poland to London, and he was there for 3 years and supervising the printing of his Haggadah. He left London and he was there when World War II broke out in September of 1939. In 1940, he left for the United States, but first went to Canada. When he went to Canada, he had to fill out papers, immigration papers, in order to, as one goes into any country. And you ask for your name, your address, and they asked him what was his occupation. And Szyk filled out the line. He said, "I am a fighting artist." Mm-hmm. His occupation. Now, to today, to answer your question, this is an artist who's, when he fought as a fighting artist during World War II, as a propaganda artist in America, where he arrived in late 1940, he saw himself or Eleanor Roosevelt saw him as if he was on the front lines, that his art was so powerful. It was as if he was a fighter himself during the war. And everyone wrote about him. He was in the newspapers, magazines, and I would say he was incredibly famous during his own time. And when I say famous, he was famous in Poland, he was famous in France, he was famous in England, in Canada, and the United States, internationally famous. How he was forgotten after he died is a whole other issue, which we can come back to later. Why he isn't a household name, why he isn't seen as one of the greatest artists of today, let alone one of the great Jewish artists and one of the great Polish nationalists who adopted the art of a famous Polish nationalist artist. So Szyk combined all of them. But he used his art during the war, so he was very, very well known. And during the war, and I want to bring you to today, Szyk's art was against bigotry, against racism, against intolerance, against injustice. It was for freedom. And when Szyk created his art, he said, I am creating it for permanence. And the reason being is because those plagues that took place in his lifetime are still with us. Racism, bigotry, intolerance, all of these are still applicable in our own day. And so there are Arthur Szyks that are needed in the world. Arthur Szyks, not necessarily those who are artists, but those who are willing to stand up to where they see right and where they see wrong, where they see something unjust. They should use the best of what's within them, what they've been taught, whether they're a Jew, a Christian, a Muslim, use the best of their tradition to come forward and be an advocate for their neighbor, for their brother, And that is more than ever. I shouldn't say more than ever. It is necessary today as it was always necessary in times of great conflict between peoples and between nations. I would like to suggest to those listening that if you want to see how some young people today are feeling about Arthur Szyk, go to YouTube. There is a video there called Arthur Szyk, Soldier in Art. There's also one called Soldier in Art, Arthur Szyk. It's an entirely different video, but these are both 10 and 15 minutes long. But the first one, Arthur Szyk, Soldier in Art, is a short documentary film that I made maybe 15 years ago, again, when I met you, Joanna, of high school students in Mercer Island in Seattle. And these high school students are interacting with Szyk's art. They have an important message to say about how they saw injustice as portrayed through Szyk's art, and how they saw him as brave, as standing up. And I think that would be a fabulous piece to share in classrooms, whether one is in the United States or one is in Germany or one is in Poland or in England or in France. And one can see the high school students themselves speaking up as to the importance of Szyk today in their own lives.
We found also that the young people love his art, actually. Well, you prepared some, you want to share with us some Artur Szyk work today, yes, with the presentation.
I have 9 pictures to show. Let me share my screen and hopefully do this in a smooth fashion. And let's just see. There we are. Okay, this is my first vision, and I hope it can be seen. Joanna, can you just tell me if you can see it?
It's very good.
Wonderful. This is one of more than 40 illuminated pages for the Statute Koalicje that you see written at the top, or the Statute des Koalicje, since it's work he worked on in Paris in 1927 and 1928, or the Statutes of College, as it's referred to in English. Here you see Casimir the Great sitting on the throne. It's the first work I've chosen to share with you, because the Statutes of College goes back to the 13th century when Boleslav the Pious granted civil and religious privileges to the Jews of Poland. And it was reaffirmed by subsequent Polish kings, among them Casimir the Great, hence him sitting on the throne here. To my mind, in addition to Arthur Szyk's Passover Haggadah, which he illuminated in Poland between 1934 and 1936, and was printed in 1940, but together with that, and which I consider Arthur Szyk's most important religious work, the Statute of College, what you're seeing here on the screen, I consider to be his most important historic work. And I also consider it to be one of the greatest illuminated manuscripts, certainly of the 20th century, and perhaps of all time. And I will tell you why I think that. I'll be very direct. Not only do I believe it combines great art, but it combines it with a great message. And what was the message of the Statutes of College for Arthur Szyk? It was to take those civil and religious privileges that were granted to Jews in the 13th century, and that while he was living in Paris in the late 1920s and witnessing anti-Semitism that was beginning to grow throughout Europe, he saw a need for countries in his own day to begin to grant their minorities these privileges, because he felt in turn they would be empowered, as Poland was when it granted privileges to Jews throughout the centuries. So in this illuminated manuscript, Szyk, through his illuminations, highlights those rights that Poles gave to the Jews, but he also shows how Jews contributed to Polish society throughout the centuries. And the point being to show the mutual and beneficial cooperation between Poles and Jews, and their history together, as showing Jews and the benefit that came to both. And the idea was that Szyk hoped that this might happen in his own time, and hence worked on this in 1927, 1928 in Paris. And then it was ultimately published in 1932 in Munich. Curiously, this is a great document of freedom and was published in one of the most anti-Semitic cities in Europe on the eve of Hitler coming to power in 1933. So this is a work that I want to share with you first. I also want to point out something that one might not read in textbooks about Polish-Jewish cooperation, because I'm well aware of prejudices or stereotypes that many Jews have of Poles, that many Poles have of Jews. Szyk, being a member of both the Polish and Jewish communities, embraced and admired both. He didn't like anti-Semitism, but he admired in both and felt part of both communities. I mean, this was, but what one will not see in textbooks or hear about is that in 1932, the Polish government traveled this portfolio of art to 14 cities in Poland. In 1932, showing Polish and Jewish cooperation in 14 cities. Hence, Arthur Szyk's artwork became a bridge between Poles and Jews. And this work, I wish I could show you all of the 40 illuminations and share with you how brilliant this is. But there are more images that one can see on the internet, and begin to really look into the meaning of this document, which is highly overlooked in our own time, both the document itself and Szyk's work itself.
It is why we are trying to follow with our exhibition after his road through Poland and Vilnius and Lvov, because it was these cities the Statute of College was traveling around Poland in 30s.
No, absolutely correct. I think it's a fabulous idea to take this to the various cities that the Polish government thought were important that this work be shown. Now, let me also mention that in 1932, this was published. In 1933, the war broke out. In 1933, and this relates to this work, Arthur Szyk received an invitation by the American government to travel to the United States. And in December 1933, he came to America for the purpose of exhibiting his works on freedom at the Library of Congress. Imagine this, a single person, a Jew in Poland, in the middle of Poland, is invited to come to America. Hitler comes to power to show his works on freedom. And this work is exhibited actually first in the Brooklyn Museum and then in the Library of Congress. And it's shown with one other body of work on freedom. And that was his series of George Washington and the American Revolution. Here you see Washington as a soldier on a horse. This was a series of works that he also did in Paris and completed in 1930 and was published in 1932. One of the other great cities of anti-Semitism on the rise of Hitler's coming to power a year later. And these two bodies of works, the Statute of College, result of which that Arthur Szyk was also presented with the George Washington Bicentennial Medal by the American government. This, again, the third medal of freedom that he is given during his lifetime. The first, the Gold Cross of Merit in Poland, and also the Palme Académique by the French government for his works on behalf of humanity there as well. And Szyk proudly wore those three medals on his clothing on various important events, and also when he painted himself in some of his works. This is a work of Kosciuszko. It is part of a series of 23 paintings that Szyk did in London in 1938 as part of the Polish-American fraternity. And one can see in the border here, the American symbol, the American flag, the Polish eagle, and so on around the border. These works, these 23 works, were exhibited at the Polish Pavilion on the eve of World War II, and were there in New York when the war broke out. there were these of them reproduced in postcards, but only 20 of them were reproduced in postcards and eventually sold or at the pavilion. I chose this work because it is so multifaceted, and it really is a message for today. Let me explain. In many portraits which Szyk has done of military figures, he highlights in the background usually a battle scene. He did this for Peter the Great, he did it for Joan of Arc, he did it for Pulaski, he did it for others. Here, Szyk does not paint a military scene in the background. Here he actually chooses to highlight West Point, which when Kosciuszko came to America and he served as a brigadier, ultimately became a brigadier general in George Washington's army, along with Pulaski, who became the head of cavalry, and Kosciuszko, who rose in the ranks of the American forces. Szyk chose to highlight in this series, of which this is one of 23 paintings, the contributions that Poles made to American life. And believe me, it was intentional that he did this in 1938. It was Szyk's hope that there would be closer bonds and between Poland and America on the eve of World War II. And again, his art is serving as a bridge between countries and between nations. In any case, to focus in on this picture, what is Szyk highlighting? It is certainly not the military aspect of Kosciuszko, even though he is wearing military garb, but rather the focus is on the document which is being held in his hand. What is this document? This is the last will and testament. His last will and testament, which he completed before he finally went back, he finally went back to Europe to live for this. He went back one time, then went back the second time, and in 1794, he completed this document, which was his last will and testament. And what is in this last will and testament? He is stating that as a result of the money which was owed to him by the American government, which was the equivalent of about $15,000 for his military service during the American Revolution, he says in this document that he would like to give this to his good friend Thomas Jefferson. And with that money, he would like Jefferson to buy the emancipation and the freedom of his slaves. This is Kosciuszko. He returned to Europe, of course. Kosciuszko had freed and built schools for minorities, for blacks. He organized the first Jewish Legion that fought under him in the late 1700s. And this was a man who was a remarkable figure in his advocacy for humanity at large. And so what Arthur Szyk was doing when he created this in 1938, he was drawing upon a document from the 18th century and demonstrating how important it was in the late 1930s for the peoples of the world and for the people in the year 2020 who might be sitting in Poland or listening to this presentation in the United States and telling us that this is important for each of us in our own lifetime. And this is the great eternal quality of Arthur Szyk, both through his art and through its messages. This work, Poland Greets Her Good Neighbors. It is self-evident that in the center, that in 1939, the Polish soldier has to ward off, has to defend himself against Germany, who is invading Poland from the west, and symbolized by Hitler here and Stalin on the right. And of course, these are not her good neighbors. These are her bad neighbors. And Szyk paints this or draws this immediately in 1939, and it is featured ultimately in his book in 1941 that's published in America. I'm not sure if it appeared in the British press, where he was creating also political art and caricatures and cartoons, attacking both the Germans and the Russians when the war had broken out. Poland Greets Her Good Neighbors, London, 1939. I chose this work of art because at the Defenders of Warsaw, I could have chosen from probably more than 2,500 or 3,000. I'm not really quite sure how many works of art Arthur Szyk did during World War II, and I'm actually working on a database of how many works of art he did create, but I chose this one because these defenders of Warsaw are Pole on the left and a Jew on the right, who are sitting side by side in facing their common enemy. As powerful as it gets, the Antichrist. And while there are brilliant messages to be delivered in this work, one should concentrate on the artwork in its own right. If you look closely enough, you'll see in Hitler's eyes are skulls. And it may be hard to see on the screen. In fact, I think it is. In his hair, Szyk has painted words, "Woe to the vanquished." And in the banner, "Today is Europe, tomorrow is the world." Szyk is clear in pointing out the intent of evil here, as it will affect the peoples of the world who will be put in chains, the skulls, and also Szyk interjects the Japanese here who are allies of the Nazis. I think that this political work of art was the most widely reproduced in America in 1942. It appeared in leading magazines, Cosmopolitan among them. It was featured in the New York Times at least on one occasion, maybe twice, and also exhibited the Antichrist. And here are among those who were affected by this Antichrist, those to be shot as dangerous enemies of the Third Reich, the young Jewish children in front with the Nazi tribunal here. Szyk fighting on behalf of the Jewish people. And it's my opinion, he was the leading artist for Jewish rescue in America during World War II. His art appeared everywhere. Newspapers, magazines, on poster stamps, on the front of journals, at rallies that were held throughout the United States in Madison Square Garden, with pageants created by Ben Hecht and Kurt Weill and Billy Rose called "We Will Never Die" and so on. And these two figures are actually used quite regularly in Szyk's artwork. These are the enemies of the Third Reich. This, to my mind, is the most important and the most powerful work calling attention to the destruction of European Jewry that Szyk created. It's called De Profundis. It means out of the depths, Latin words. De Profundis is based on Psalm 130, which is important to both Jewish and Christian liturgy. With that, one sees that this has a message both about the Jews and for the world at large, and particularly for the Christian world. And this is further emphasized by the fact among the lifeless and dying Jews, one sees Jesus here holding the 10 Commandments, as if to say, were Jesus alive in 1943, when Szyk drew this work of art, he too would have been killed as a Jew. Their eyes are almost wide open. This is almost, Szyk wants to speak out as if to give voice to the living dead. I want to call attention as I talk about this work of art a little bit more to the fact that there were two other works of art that were that are similar to this in calling attention to what's going on in Europe. In 1937, I believe 1937, Picasso creates Guernica, which calls attention to the bombing of Guernica, documenting human tragedy. In 1938, Marc Chagall creates Antichrist, which shows lifeless and dying Jews, or it shows a house that's burning. It shows a synagogue that's burning, a Jew who's fleeing with a Torah scroll, and in the center of Chagall's work, he shows Jesus on a cross with his arms open. This done in response again to the Anschluss and to Kristallnacht. Also, Chagall indicated it was also a response to Picasso's Guernica. What do all three of these works have in common? Picasso's Guernica and Chagall's work of art and De Profundis, all of them document human tragedy. But Arthur Szyk's work goes a step further, and that is by indicating this phrase of Cain, where is Abel thy brother, which is from the book of Genesis, where the first children in the Bible, there's already a murder where Cain kills Abel, and God says to Cain, where is Abel thy brother? God, of course, if one believes that God exists and is all-knowing, he doesn't have to ask the question, he would know. This is really a question for Cain. Cain, to accept responsibility and that justice needs to be meted out. This is a call for justice. This is a call for responsibility. Szyk is asking, who is responsible for this? Who is behind all of this? And that one needs to take a sense of accountability. This is reproduced in a magazine. This is reproduced full page in a newspaper in February of 1943 in the Chicago Sun, because almost every work of art of Szyk was done for the purpose of reproductions. And this appeared full page, this image across the top and text below. How did this get into a newspaper for the American public to see in 1943, shortly after it was announced that 2 million Jews had been murdered by the Nazis, and it was public information already at that point? Did the owner of the newspaper put it there? No. Did the editor choose to put it in? No. Which Jewish group paid for this to be in a newspaper? And the answer is no Jewish group paid for it. It was a Christian group who paid for this. It was called the Christian Textbook Commission. It was part of the Protestant movement in the United States. And in the text below this image that appeared in the newspaper, they said that because of the anti-Semitism that has been taught in our textbooks over the decades, and the seeds of anti-Semitism that have been sown in Christian civilization over the centuries, we as Christians need to take responsibility for this. Szyk art is used by a Christian group to call attention that everyone needs to look at their own teachings, their own value system, and they need to re-examine it when that system is filled with hatred and animosity and the demeaning of others and bigotry, because this is what it ends up as death, as destruction, and a part of humanity is taken apart. And it is Arthur Szyk's artwork that is shown. In my opinion, this is the single most important Holocaust work of art created on paper during the war. And I also say that because not only the genius of the artwork itself and the messages, but it was reproduced in newspapers and in journals, and seminars, lectures, discussions were held over this with this work of art at the center, particularly in Queens, New York, and Forest Hills, and in other places where dialogue and discussion would be taking place. De Profundus. And this is my final work of art to share with you. Szyk was very concerned about the plight of, again, using his value system as a Jew to be an advocate for humanity at large. Szyk created several works of art in the 1940s advocating for the black man in America. This is particularly those who served in the American military, where blacks and whites were segregated, and there were segregated units that he attacked, even while he loved America. He was willing to stand up to what he thought was wrong and unjust. And here again, this is after the war is over, but lynching is part of American life. Again, something very much part of a mentality that Szyk attempted to eradicate. Here you see a black man who had dressed in a World War II uniform, who proudly served his country. Szyk has painted the Purple Heart on his chest. He has a cross around his neck, but his arms are tied behind his back with rope, and behind him are the Ku Klux Klan in America, who hated Jews and Catholics and other minorities. And Szyk's caption here, or heading at the very top, is, "Do not forgive them, O Lord, for they know what they do." You know, the book of Luke in the Bible says, where Jesus says, "Forgive them, O Lord, for they do not know what they do." Szyk flips that on its head. Do not forgive them. They know what they do. And at the bottom, Szyk writes about, and I'm looking close at the caption just to read it, "Each Negro lynching is a national disaster, is a stab in the back of our government in its desperate struggle for democracy." Szyk was concerned in 1949 about what was taking place in America. If he were alive today, he would be highly concerned about what is taking place in America and on the world front. And I guess, Joanna, this takes me back to the very beginning of your question. This ends my PowerPoint presentation, but it takes me very back to your first question. What does Arthur Szyk have to say to us today in this world? And I don't need to use many words. You can just look at his images and they can speak for themselves.
Oh, thank you very much. I also think that his work is very up to date. Actually, we can learn a lot, and Artur Szyk talks to us today. So he's not a historical artist. He's an artist of today. But before I want to continue that, but I want also to ask you, why do you think, or what is your answer for it? Why Artur Szyk was forgotten for so many years? Of course, there are some people who knows him and who are with passion loves his art, but actually he was forgotten, and we discover here also in Poland that there are some people who knows about him a lot, but very, very few. And we still we are so happy when we can show our exhibition somewhere, and we know that there are more and more people to know his work. So why do you think he was forgotten?
Well, first of all, we're not just forgetting an artist who created great art. We also forgot a man who was very famous. So I mean, how could somebody who be so famous and forgotten? And when I say famous, I mean, in Poland itself, he was friends with General Sikorski, who led who now was a decorated military figure, but who led the Polish government in exile when it moved to London when the war broke out. He was friends with Paderewski. He has correspondence with Paderewski, the pianist who became the president of Poland. Pilsudski he admired. Szyk was well known. I mean, so in Poland, he was known. And in the United States, well, before I even get to the United States, in Paris, I mean, his illustrated books were among the most expensive, the most well decorated, and circulated in Poland. His pochoir books of the Well of Jacob, the Temptation of Saint Anthony, are reproduced and decorated by the French government. I mean, he lived there for more than 10 years and illustrated numerous books. And in England, where his Haggadah was published, which was the most expensive new book in the entire world in 1940. Decorated, called by many who would say this book was worthy of being considered one of the greatest books ever created by the hand, produced by the hand of man. I mean, in England, in France, in Poland, when he came to Canada before the US, all over the newspapers and the press, he's well known. And in America, where he's well celebrated. I mean, and even before America, after in Geneva, in Switzerland, where they gathered in 1931 for the League of Nations charter to be created and developed. Szyk was the artist in the world who was invited to Geneva to illuminate that. He was so famous. So before I talk about why he was forgotten, one needs to know how well known he was. You know, you get up in the morning, you read the New York Post. In New York, you see his art. You decide that you want to make a telephone call. You take out the Manhattan telephone directory, and his artwork's on the covers in the Manhattan telephone directory, the Brooklyn telephone directory. You decide you want to go to an exhibition in New York. So you go to the Knoedler Gallery, which is one of the most famous, important art galleries in the world. And Picasso's not there that week, but Szyk is. And you go to the gallery and you see Szyk. And at the end of the day, you go home and you want to send letters and you put poster stamps like Easter seals on envelopes. And there's a variety of Arthur Szyk poster stamps. So that's your day's filled with Arthur Szyk. And then you're hungry at the end of the day and you go to Times Square in the center of New York and you want to go for a hot dog or something, I don't know, at Nedick's, and you want to eat hot dog and a orange soda, and your neck is tired because you're so busy looking down at exhibits on it, and you look up and you see a billboard in Times Square of Arthur Szyk's artwork of Abraham Lincoln. I mean, this man is famous. And then what you say to me is the question that has to be asked. What happened to Arthur Szyk? How can people forget him when his Haggadah is continuously reproduced and is one of the most brilliant illuminated manuscripts, which is printed as a book in the 20th century. And many Jews know him through the Haggadah or through his proclamation of independence of the state of Israel. And that's what fascinated me when I became interested in Szyk. I couldn't understand why people did not know him. And that's what drove me more and more forward. And here's, I think, I don't know, here's a combination of things like the perfect storm that comes together that may be why so many people haven't heard of Szyk. First of all, he died in 1951. He was 57 years old. If he had lived probably to his 90s, like Chagall and others, he may have been more well known. First, Szyk, second of all, Szyk was not part of the art world. He was not part of any school. There was no school of Arthur Szyk. Art historians were not writing about Szyk. I don't think anybody knew what to do with him because he created such diverse art in so many different areas and different styles. You'll always recognize Szyk's style when you see it. But he illustrated children's books. He illustrated political works of art. He was an illuminator. No one knew exactly, and so no one wrote about him and no one continued in his tradition. When he died in 1951, and there were dealers who worked with his art, the family dismissed all of the dealers and they felt themselves that they would promote his art. But then his son George died immediately and Szyk's wife Julia did not continue to promote his art. So you had no dealers, you had no family, he was not part of any school of art. Some people might say also that his works were small. You know, the works I showed on the screen are only a few inches high, 5 inches by 7 inches, 10 inches by 12 inches. If his De Profundus that I spent a lot of time on describing, which is only about 12 inches wide, I'm not sure, 12, 14 inches wide, and about 8 inches high, give or take, I'm not exactly sure. If that were as big as Picasso's Guernica, everyone would know who Szyk is. He was a miniaturist, and people like larger things. It is hard to know why he was forgotten. Even his name, S-Z-Y-K, is it Zyk, Zizik, Zeke? Many people don't know how to pronounce it. It's like you're introduced to someone whose name is not an American name, it's a foreign name, Polish name. You can't remember how to pronounce it. And so I've met so many people who've owned his, let's say, his illustrated Andersen's fairy tales since they were children. They don't remember the name, but the art, they remember. It actually haunted them in some way, but they don't remember it was Arthur Szyk. I know I'm leaving a few things out here and there, but all of these come together. And also, I might say, he was not embraced by the communities in which he lived. I mean, while he was a great Polish patriot and advocate, you know, following 1943, his attitudes changed a little bit. They were confusing and complex because of his relationship that he thought the Soviet Union at a particular point might be helpful to Poland, which he loved. It wasn't the Soviet Union he loved. He loved Poland and he loved the Poles and he loved the Jews. He thought that I'm not sure that was a good position for him to take, but the the Poles themselves didn't embrace him after the war, but neither did the Israelis or the Jews in America or Israel embrace him, because he was at odds with the American Jewish community because he felt they didn't do enough to rescue American Jews. And also, it wasn't kept alive here and in Israel. I mean, Szyk was a militant artist. He was an activist artist, and the Ben-Gurion government was not a government, that labor government, that would have embraced him. Szyk was part of, his friends were Menachem Begin and Ze'ev Jabotinsky, and these were not people who were recognized by the early founders of the Jewish state. And so hence Szyk was marginalized, as was the group that he belonged to, of the Bergson group, who were activists who came to America, who were not part of the American Jewish community, American Zionist organizations, who were at odds with Rabbi Stephen S. Wise and his attempt to rescue European Jews. Szyk and his friends were more activists. They took out ads in newspapers and attacked the American Jewish community for not doing enough. So when Szyk died, you didn't have little groups. You didn't have groups in Israel. You didn't have groups in America. You didn't have groups in Poland who would keep him alive as well. And you didn't have, excuse me for saying this, you didn't have Irvin Ungars, like, you know, who were around. You didn't have Joanna Podolskas who were around. You had the family who had died, and the dealers who weren't there, and he wasn't being embraced. And it just all came together. But no more. Szyk is on the internet. He's traveling Poland. He's traveling America. There's publications. There's films that one can see about him. And
but actually, most of us, of course, we saw some exhibitions. I mean, we as a public, because you know a lot of originals, but actually, where can we see originals? I know that you are working on it, and it is amazing because most of people can see Artur Szyk in copies of copies. Of course, in internet is wonderful page you created, and we present in our exhibition also only reproductions. I'm sorry. But where can we find originals?
Sure.
Not only in private places, but in many institutions.
Thank you for asking that. And by the way, to see the original is another world compared to the printed work. I often think, you know, how Szyk himself would have felt. In fact, a German curator that I worked with in an exhibition in Berlin in 2008, Katja Wittmann, asked the same question. You know, how could Szyk have ever been happy with the reproductions that were done of his artwork when they're so jewel-like that the colors jump out at you? You know, and he worked almost sometimes with a brush with a single hair. And by the way, I said that once in an exhibition lecture that I was giving, and some man said, no, that's a myth. That's written about, that nobody could do that. And I went back home because I owned his original pens and his brushes. And yes, he had cut some of those brushes down to a single hair. But even knowing that, I still don't understand how he did what he did. So to see the original artwork is to enter a whole new world. And I am doing, presently, I'm working on a catalog of all the places that one could go or where all of the original art are located in institutions. And I've discovered there are about 25 institutions in the world and more than 600 and some 600 to 700 original works of art in these institutions. Among the, and I'm not quite sure yet exactly how many works of Szyk, original works of art that he did, but I'm guessing on the low side of 5,000, on the high side of 10,000. That includes sketches and drawings that he could have knocked off, you know, in 15 minutes. Versus, by the way, one should know that if you look in a book or at your exhibitions and you look at works that are the most complicated works of art, that are the most intricate and detailed, I can tell you for a fact, because I know I've interviewed two people who told me about a single work of art, one who represented Szyk and one who commissioned him to do it, about a single work of art, how long it took him to do those works of art. And the most complicated work of Arthur Szyk took him less than 1 week. Now, to see the original and to contemplate that, and you can begin to understand it even when you see the reproductions, is to understand a genius at work. But I don't want to overuse that term. You have to decide for yourself. But I am compiling a catalog which will be going to the various institutions and to others, and also will be on the internet. But right now, the largest collection of Arthur Szyk artwork in the world is held by the Judah Magnus Museum It's a Jewish museum, I think the third largest in the US, which is also overseen by and owned by, I'm not sure that owned by is the correct phrase, but it's on the campus of UC Berkeley, and it's UC Berkeley's under the auspices of the UC Berkeley University. And there is presently an exhibition of Arthur Szyk originals on view. I think it's closed because of the pandemic now, but when it opens, one can see them on exhibition. Most of the other institutions do not have Szyk's work on view because they're watercolors and gouache paintings subject to light conditions. But the Metropolitan Museum in New York, the Jewish Museum in New York, the Roosevelt Library in Hyde Park, these are some Yeshiva University Museum, McGill University in Canada are among the numerous institutions that have him. There is the Deutsches Historisches Museum in Berlin has single work of art, the Fine Arts Museum of San Francisco, on and on. Individual works of art, and one would probably have to make special arrangements in order to see the originals. But when there is an exhibition, wherever it is, travel, go see that. And in New York in 2017 was a fabulous exhibition at the New York Historical Society. And you know, when there's a Szyk exhibition, go see it, drop everything. When you can travel, when you can travel safely, you know, then we go.
All of us, hopefully. Anyway, we have to conclude very soon. So I also wanted to invite our audience to Łódź, to the city of Artur Szyk. Unfortunately, as a city or museums, we don't have originals of Artur Szyk. Even if you remember, I hoped for it that Alice Szyk will give to her city. So daughter of Artur Szyk will offer to the city of Artur Szyk the small pictures he created in Łódź. Haggadah was created in Łódź. So it is so important for audience who are interested in, it's very important because Artur Szyk always underlined that he was Polish and he was born in Łódź and he was very connected to the city. So I think as the city of Łódź, we always remember that Artur Szyk was our citizen. He was from here.
I would, that is absolutely correct. And I've had the pleasure of being in Łódź on numerous occasions, and I can't wait to get back. There's one final word I'd like to sort of offer here. While I've talked about the Arthur Szyk's messages in his art, and while I've also talked about the great skill, craftsmanship, and genius of his original art, which we should not lose track of when we're looking at the messages. We should also look at the art. I've come to believe through my association with Szyk's art over the past 25 years and my relationship with his daughter, Alexandra, who, may she rest in peace, died 3 years ago, who we talked regularly on the phone over more than 2 decades. What I've come to realize about Arthur Szyk, that behind the great art and behind the great messages stands the great man. And in my mind, this man serves as a hero, not only in his own day, but for our own day. And wherever we can in our lives today, look for heroes. And while we find them among us, sometimes we can find it among those in the past. If we can keep them alive, such as being done in Poland and in the US particularly, we also can make them our friends, make them our companions, learn from them. And that while they can't speak to us with their words, they can speak to us through their images. And it's our job to interpret them and give them meaning in our own day. That's what Arthur Szyk allowed us to do. That's what he did through his pen and through his brush. And so if we can carry another great human being with us on our journey through life, and we had to pick 1 or 2 or 3, allow that 1, 2, or 3 to be Arthur Szyk.
Thank you very much. Irvin Ungar, the man behind the Artur Szyk Renaissance in the world. Thank you so much, and hope to see you in person in Łódź, and we will come back to talk about Artur Szyk art.
Thank you, Joanna.